All right, let's get started. Everyone, we'll start with some introductions. I'm Jacob, founder and CEO at Macro. We are a just over 2-year-old venture-backed software company based in New York. Calling in from our office here in Soho with our team. And we are basically building really fast document productivity software. It's used by law, finance, real estate, insurance, companies, and more. And as part of that, we've always had a focus on AI. My background, I did finance and computer science at Penn. I stayed for a master's degree in the natural language processing department, which I finished in December of 2020. I worked in the lab of Chris Callison Birch there, which is well-known NLP lab. They've been doing research for a long time in classical NLP and more recently in neural networks. Spent a lot of time thinking about common sense reasoning at Penn, as well as doing research in open information extraction, and finally research on complex, basically graphical analysis of legal documents, which will feed into this presentation that we're going to go into today. So I'm joined here by Casey and Thor. Casey is of LexFusion and Thor of Dechert, and Casey is a close advisor of the company. And Thor, we've been working with on deploying GPT-4. So I'll let Casey and Thor introduce themselves. Casey?
Casey Flaherty, Chief Strategy Officer at LexFusion. We help accelerate legal innovation, and there's no innovation that anyone's more focused on right now than large language models. But there's a lot of confusion and a lot of noise in the market, and we hope to cut down on a bit of that today and focus the conversation.
Hey everyone, I'm Thor. I'm at Dechert. I've been at Dechert for 10 years. I practiced for 6. Moved over to innovation about 5 years ago. I've been working with Casey and Jacob for a while now on a number of GPT ideas and initiatives. And my focus is liaising between our IT teams and our attorney teams.
Awesome. Okay, brief intros. These guys didn't give themselves enough credit. There are a lot of people talking about this, and we're really doing stuff. And so I'm really thankful to them for working with us on this. Let's get into the presentation. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a lay of the land overview of LLMs and anatomy of complex legal documents. We'll go a little bit out of order here, actually. Talk about some real world, what's actually going on in the marketplace right now, state of the market, security and risks, and what different law firms, banks, financial institutions are actually doing on the ground right now. I think this is really applicable to anybody here who's an end user and wants to know, what can I actually use at my firm? What can we get in the door now, and what's sort of on the horizon? What are the early use cases that people are finding this useful for, and what are the ones where it doesn't live up to the Twitter hype? And then we'll do a demo of our integration, as well as talk about the next steps for us. We really just started on our integration here and have a lot more to do. And then we'll do a discussion. We have some questions here, but this is where we'd love to take some questions from everybody on the call. Awesome. So get in here. All right, let's start with an overview of LLMs and challenges. So, okay. Just going to talk a little bit here about background. So what, let's start with, well, first of all, little disclaimer. This will be a mix of fact and opinion, and apologize for any hallucinations. After all, I'm just a language model. So we'll see what we can do here. Let's look at this sentence. Casey, Jacob, and Thor present GPT-4 blank. What is the next word here? The next word could be present GPT-4 demonstration. It could be present GPT-4 video. There's a bunch of words it could be. And this is what a language model is doing. Language models essentially are predicting the next word in a sequence of tokens. And how they do that is they produce a probability distribution. So the probability distribution is acting over different words. More accurately, it's correct to say that it's acting over tokens, but basically it's producing a distribution. So like, let's say this is 0.5, this is 0.25, this is 0.25. And across a wide array of data, in the case of GPT-4, it's all web text. It's learning to produce a probability distribution over words. And then when you're doing generative, so this is the generative part of AI, is it's sampling from this distribution. And there's different ways to sample. That just means at every point in time, you have to predict the next token or the next word or whatever it may be. And what's been really surprising over the past couple months is that this has subsumed a lot of natural language processing tasks. So when I was doing my master's in NLP in 2020, there was OpenIE, there was sentiment analysis, there was just plain old information extraction, there was dependency parsing. Like there were lots of different subfields, and this is even subsuming now computer vision as we get into GPT-4, which is multimodal. So what's really been interesting is that there's one model sort of to rule them all. All right, so the history here, this is not necessarily all new. We've had language models for a while. In fact, modeling language, i.e. predicting the next token, that's what language modeling means. This has been around for a while, and this was just one of many NLP tasks. So the fact that it, in a way, has subsumed other tasks was not always a given. And the way that this started a long time ago was just predicting the next word, right? So if I wanted to predict what comes after GPT-4, I would just look at the previous one word. That's called a 1-gram model. There were 2-gram models, right? So if we model the probability of the next word over the past 2 words, and then 3-gram models over the past 3 words. And this is what was used in the 90s, 2000s for doing basic NLP tasks. So what we've arrived at now is 8K, or more recently, 32K, meaning 32,000 previous tokens, which is about 50 pages, or in the case of the 8K model, about 10 pages of text. And then when you get into the chat portion of it, this is where RLHF comes in. This is the fine-tuning portion. So if you just look at a normal language model, it's trained to predict the next word. And again, this is the cool part, is that there's so much intelligence just embedded in having to predict the next word. If I wanted to predict the next word, I need to know a lot about the world to do that really well. And the more I know about the world, the more that I'm able to predict the next word. There's an argument to be made that intelligence is really just prediction as well. So RLHF is the easy part. This is sort of the last step in which we are fine-tuning it, right? So instead of just predicting the next word, like let's say I want to learn about the American Revolution. I do not want to have to type the American Revolution and then have it autofill a bunch of text. I want to be asking in natural language, like, tell me about the American Revolution, right? So getting into an interface that actually makes sense, so sort of sculpting this intelligence into a way that's usable, is this last step. Okay, getting into some of the challenges here, and this has been widespread, is you can tell by the architecture, right? By the problem description that I've set up. The problem description meaning predict the next word, that this is not going to act as a database, right? So if I say the American Revolution started in blank, this is going to be, I'm Canadian. I did take American history. It's maybe 1776, maybe 1791, and I don't know, 1780, I don't know. There's something in there where maybe it's 1777. Anyways, I'm going to say this is a probability of 0.9. Pretty sure that's right. This is a probability of like 0.006. And then like there's a bunch of very like low probability ones down here, right? So I'm pretty sure it's this, but in the actual sampling step, let's say that we're just doing normal naive sampling, there is a 10% chance that I'm going to select an answer that's not 1776, right? So the method of sampling from these distributions really doesn't align with historical facts, right? Because there's only one right answer here, and it doesn't actually make sense to sample. Well, maybe it makes sense if it's a very spiky probability distribution, but in the end, it is a probability distribution. And if you ran this multiple times with different seeds, you could get different answers. So really, the power of these new languages models is reasoning engines, not necessarily databases. Cool. And also, that's made clear by the fact that these databases, there's no way they could encompass all of human knowledge ever, right? All of human knowledge ever is a lot of data, and these models are actually only like 500 gigabytes to a couple terabytes. So they're not going to be able to store everything, hence they won't know every fact. Another challenge is that these models are very, very expensive. So running this on top of legal documents, which we'll get into later in the presentation, can be, well, maybe prohibitively expensive, or at least very expensive, depending on the economic model of the user and how much they're billing and so forth. But just in our testing over the past like one day, we used $30 in one day. So it really does scale with the number of tokens that you're using. And it's expensive. It's very different from traditional software where we're used to everything being all margin. There are real costs to running these servers. And one argument is that these costs will go down as more hardware comes out, more competitors come out. But on the other hand, we may just keep pushing the boundaries as the models keep getting bigger and bigger and the costs stay pretty high. So there's arguments of comparing this, the cost to outsourcing, and it depends whether it's going to be worth it. And there's also many smaller models that you could use in different circumstances. But for our purposes, what I'll show in a few minutes, we're using GPT-4, which is pretty expensive. Cool. And then lastly, before I turn it over, some of the challenges around security. So, when you're feeding all your data into a large language model, this is new, and obviously large enterprises have some concerns about security. So that brings us to with or without client data. So we've heard of varying different things about this from different users as we talk to the market across law, bulge bracket banks, investment banks. So Thor, we were talking about this before the webinar, and you had mentioned it's possible to do some interesting things with client data as well as concerns about client data. Could you say more about how you guys are thinking about this and what maybe you guys at Dechert, as well as what you're hearing from the market generally in terms of the security posture?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of client requirements on what you can and cannot do with client data. And I think we're seeing that both in the realm of some clients will say you cannot use AI on anything. Some clients will say you can use AI to train models, but only we can benefit from those. And then you see a whole range of what clients are asking for. So you have to manage that. So one easy way out, at least initially, and where we've started is we're using GPT models on a lot of public data because we can pull that, we can use RPA to grab that in, process it, and extract the data. And then once we have that, we can use our GPT models on that because that's easy. It's public data, it's there, it's a way for us to train our models. And then once we're comfortable with the client piece, and we have to be very careful with that, that's the part where we then start to expose them to client data. But I think any law firm has to be very, very careful when using client data on these models because there's still a lot of uncertainty about what people can see, where the data goes, what happens when you train it. So it's a space that pretty much any law firm that's getting into the GPT space is watching. However, hopefully we're not the only law firm. I'm pretty sure there are a bunch of other law firms out there that are finding these use cases where you really don't need client data to train the algorithm, and that allows you to upskill yourself and start to test what works and what doesn't.
Makes a lot of sense. And when you're for both your firm and the market generally, what I've heard from a couple folks is that the engagement letters are sometimes structured. This is unique to law firms in a certain way. Is this a client by client thing where you have to get consent from each client, or is there a way, which would obviously slow the rollout ability, or is there a way to sort of roll these out more broadly?
I think you're going to see a plethora of approaches. I think some clients are going to have certain requirements and you just have to live with those. And I think that's fine. Other clients are going to be more permissive because at the end of the day, they want the benefits of the AI. Ultimately, what you're valuing is security with the business need for using these algorithms. And if no client lets you train an algorithm with their data, at some point, there is going to be an impact on the billings. If you can't use AI and GPT on getting your work done, I think there is going to be a negative impact at some point. So it's really just a balancing act of how much value are you getting out of these GPT models, and with that continuing to increase, I foresee more and more clients are going to be open to that, assuming, of course, that all the challenges around security and confidentiality have been fully vetted and verified.
Makes sense. And do you think there's the sort of excitement and hype is maybe helping to help clients move past some of these security concerns, or at least make them willing to sort of work with it and so forth? Or are when it actually comes to deploying these models, are the security concerns sort of prohibitive and it's kind of just hitting pause and wait and see mode?
I think the hype has actually caused the opposite. So I think a lot of clients are very sensitive around this for very good reasons. It's easy to mess up here. And I think there are a lot of unknowns, and it's the unknown unknowns that people are worried about. And so people are trying to be extra cautious on that front. And I think every law firm is trying to be extra cautious while at the same time gaining a skill set and an understanding of how to use it once people are more comfortable with it. The other thing to think about is a lot of the vendors in this space and a lot of the very large vendors that have these OpenAI models that they offer, they still haven't figured out everything in deploying and using it within law firm environments. And I think given the holes on that front, the fact that the infrastructure in certain instances simply doesn't exist, I think that's another reason that both law firms and clients are being cautious on deploying these, but still, very active in understanding them because everybody realizes it could be a game changer in a lot of contexts.
Makes sense. Briefly, before I turn it over to Casey to do a state of the market, when it comes to our security, we're offering this shortly after this live demo where we're unveiling it as an optional add-in. And we've been mentioning this to a few clients as well as prospectives. And I think that's the way to go about it for now. A lot of folks are very interested in it and want to see it. But maybe it comes, after the initial deployment, instead of lengthening the original security review coming after in a second review. We'll talk about pricing towards the end of this because again, the GPT-4 is quite expensive. But that's what we're doing. Everything from our perspective is within our virtual private cloud. And both Azure and OpenAI have talked about how these basically guarantees to vendors that are, the data that's fed into them aren't going to be used for further training, which obviously would be a complete no-go. And we assume this is going to get stronger in the future as more providers of large language models come in. But with Microsoft in the mix, I think that's providing a fair amount of comfort to lots of buyers and prospective buyers of GPT-4 add-ins. Okay, so Casey, it's a lot of
Jacob, I think there's a question from Matt.
Oh, okay.
I see his raised hand.
I pull up questions.
Hey, thank you, Casey. If you can hear me, Matt Bakehausen here. Thor, I just wanted to ask a question, maybe make a distinction. So you were talking about using client context and the client data in the context of training the language models or algorithms, but there are use cases for using the AI tools on client data, and you're getting benefit from that, but the client data is not training the models, right? So I just wanted to ask you that question and see if that changes your answer at all.
Yes, I mean, I have to be a bit careful about what I say about what we're doing at Dechert, specifically. But we are monitoring all client requirements and making sure we're adhering to them. All I can really say is that our initial use cases have been focused on public data, because that is an easy way to train and test these things without exposing client data. But at some point, client data may be entered, but I think most law firms are not there yet.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And this is representative, I think, of what we've had in private conversations across the market landscape with both financial and large legal institutions. Is there's not necessarily a specific reason, other than are you training on my data? No, we're not training on your data. Okay. There's still a general hesitancy, I think, that lingers just because of the newness of it and the security requirements in those industries, despite the fact that there may not be sort of like an acute reason why they can't be used. Okay, so handing it over briefly to Casey to talk about the market landscape of generative AI and GPT-4 in legal.
And yeah, if you'll let me share my screen, yeah, I think that general hesitancy is a great place to start. I recognize a lot of the names on this webinar, and I know that you are yourselves engaged amongst each other in the kind of nuanced conversations that Thor and Jacob and Matt were just having, but that with a lot of your stakeholders, it's far more binary, black and white. Should we ban ChatGPT? And just, Jacob, you can see the Samsung tells employees not to use.
Yep.
Great. And this is understandable, especially for Samsung. It's really bad if people start taking confidential data, your source code, your meetings, and putting them into public apps. There are absolutely data security concerns. It's bad, but I'm not sure it's different. I'm not sure it's really different than people sending something from their work email to their Gmail so they can use it on commercial apps on their iPad, simply because they want to get work done. And these new AI-powered applications offer all kinds of opportunities to get work done. And the amount of temptation that will be out there is insane. We've never seen anything move this fast become this widespread at this kind of rate. The genie is out of the bottle. And so talking about banning or not banning ChatGPT is missing the point, because to ban access to every LLM powered application, you essentially have to block the internet, and not just the internet, but you'd have to stop upgrading your Microsoft stack, including your cybersecurity stack. You'd have to stop using Google, including their forms of cybersecurity, your CRM, Tableau, Slack, Zillow, Yelp, Alexa. This is already close to being everywhere, and it'll be more places in not too distant future, including in the heads of CEOs, COOs, clients, law firms, everybody. Now, I know we all remember the good old days back in November when ChatGPT came out, and it was all very cute, and it was the largest public beta in history. And then something changed. We went from this new frontier to something that was a bit scary, and essays about how literally everyone on Earth was going to die. They're valid conversations. I know Jacob wants to talk about AGI. I myself am a much smaller thinker and obsessed with smaller nightmares. In particular, I think a lot about situations like this, where the CEO has just come from a meeting with McKinsey or Deloitte or Accenture or insert big name consultancy about digital transformation. And the GC is like, well, we can't do that. Or the GC is talking to the law firm partner. Well, what about all this new ISF? Well, we can't do that. To me, it's akin to having a similar conversation 30 years ago about email. Because it is, in fact, the case that there are massive data security issues with email. So if you say data security, you are not wrong. But if that's the only thing you can say, then you are not serious. This is not a strategy, but this is a completely appropriate reaction to where we are right now. There are so many models that are about to power so many different applications for so many different ways of doing different things. And these are foundation models. They are part of much larger systems that have to be assessed on their own merits, not just for data security, but for efficacy. And we know that there's going to be an absolute tidal wave of garbage products premised on AI magic, and that there's already an insane amount of noise in the market, and it's only going to get louder. And it's going to get louder in an environment where people don't really want to change, and yet they also feel like they have to. And so we're going to have even more of the natural push-pull between doing everything right, but also and doing what actually needs to be done to advance the business. And we're only at the beginning. This is an accelerating growth curve, and that may inspire some of us to want to slow down, and you certainly should want to slow down. And yet it already feels like we're running the Red Queen's race, where we've got to run faster and faster just to fall behind more slowly. What was it, 2 hours ago, this article came out in the Wall Street Journal talking about what Microsoft, Ford, DLA, Kirkland, Skadden, and Oric have been doing with GPT-4 as beta testers, many of them since before ChatGPT was even released. So we're at the starting line, but some people are already sprinting, and some people are standing still. And that really is the state of the market. Flood of products, some of which are good, some of which are fascinating, many of which are a lot of noise. And we're going to have to sift through them, figure out what works for what use case in what scenario, and move forward, both with deliberate caution, but also deliberate speed. And with that, I want to throw it to Thor, who's been working on those exact problems, figuring out where and how to move forward, not in order to have all the answers, but to be able to ask the right questions and be positioned to evaluate the application of this technology in systems and software like Macro. Thor?
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, perfect segue. Because now the question is, given all those trends, what are you going to do about it? And any law firm is in this position. The way we see it, or the way I see it, is there are really three pillars here. Pillar number one is the new norm, right? In the same way that email changed how we work, this will change how everyone works. It's going to be in Outlook. It's going to be in Word. It's going to be in Excel. That's pillar number one. Pillar number two, vendor solutions. Those are going to be key. And then pillar number three are the things that you can build on your own. When it comes to the first pillar, and maybe it's Office, maybe it's Google Docs, whatever vendor you use, all of those are going to have GPT enabled in them. It's just a matter of adapting to it. And I think the two things to focus on are, A, do you have your IT infrastructure in place? And B, are you training people properly so that they know how to use it and take advantage of it? I think those are the two things there. Most firms will adapt to this probably very quickly because they have to. And we're just going to see that happen. And that's, in a way, that's more passive in that you're just responding to new technology coming in. The second big bucket or pillar is a focus on vendors. And I think every law firm should realize that they're not the best at building tech solutions. They're going to be tech solutions that vendors are going to be able to build best. But they're also going to be tech solutions that are better than the core apps. So, a Microsoft, a Google, the big vendors, they're building GPT solutions for everyone, not legal specific ones. And I can guarantee you there are going to be a lot of legal specific GPT enabled apps that are going to make a very big difference. And the question is, how much better are they than the big vendors out there? And I think you're going to see some are better and some are worse. The big vendors, they've got hundreds or thousands of engineers, whereas the Macros of the world, they've got a handful or two handfuls. But again, if you focus on a niche use case, you can really drive a lot of value. And we're going to see disruption. I mean, it's both against the big vendors, but also against the existing vendor space. So a lot of the vendors we work with today, there is a chance a new startup comes in and disrupts what they do because they use a GPT-enabled strategy. So that's the second big bucket. And then touching on what Casey said on training people and learning to ask the right questions. When it comes to vendors, it's not about picking the winning horse. This is still early days. No one knows who's going to win this race. It's about knowing what questions to ask, being able to evaluate them, using them where you can, but really just educating yourself on how and where to use it. The third big bucket, the pillar, are the custom builds. So, we've built a number of these. We have a handful of GPT solutions we already use. We don't need ChatGPT because we have our own internal version. I think a lot of law firms will be there very soon as well. It's getting very easy to build your own internal GPT solutions, and I think that's great. But that doesn't take away the need for the vendor solutions, because at the end of the day, vendors are going to be able to build better interfaces, and they're going to have an upper hand on some of the processing of documents and the prompt engineering. The part I don't know, and I can't imagine anybody knows, is who's going to build the better prompt ultimately. I think the Macros of the world, they can probably build some pretty good prompts when it comes to parsing and processing documents. But the question is, when it comes to subject matter expertise, I mean, that's something that law firms have. So query whether, law firms are going to be able to build other types of very good prompts that, really help, get work done in ways that Macro can't, because they don't have that subject matter expertise that really goes in depth. So at the end of the day, you're probably going to see all three come out: vendors, custom solutions, and the big vendors like Microsoft, Google, and who else is in that space. But I think you have to think of all three if you're a law firm, because each of the three has value, and if you're neglecting one of them, you're going to be overpaying or, under providing value to clients. So with that as an overview, I'm going to pass it back over to Jacob.
Awesome. Thanks, Thor. Cool. So I'm going to go into now both our integration as well as legal documents. I can tell you a lot of our team, everybody on our team that's an engineer is already using GPT-4 and ChatGPT to write code. And I think it is very good at writing code, and far better than it is as a, let's call it, it's far better as a code co-pilot than it is right now as a legal co-pilot. And that's due to a few complexities, legal and finance when it comes to long documents. There's a few wrinkles when it comes to these domain areas that make it a little bit harder to use. So we're going to talk about those now, as well as show our integration. So let me pull up. Okay. So what makes this hard, and what do legal documents look like? So for that, I'm actually just going to demonstrate what a long legal / financial document looks like. So this is a credit document. This is the document anyone who's sat through a macro demo, you've probably seen this. And legal documents, unlike computer code, which fall into like generally short bite-sized files, these are very, very long, and the formatting is pretty bad, as in a PDF form, you're basically looking at an image, right? So this character is really just this 2.02. In the document, it doesn't actually say 2.02. This is just characters rendered at certain XY positions. So that's the first challenge, is that especially when it comes to PDFs, which is sort of the final form for legal documents, you really don't have any sort of good data embedded in the document. Not only do you not have good data, it's actually substantially worse than even a text file. So the layout information, for example, the fact that this one lies about 1 tab width from the left-hand side might be semantically relevant. And you don't have that data other than reverse engineering that from the underlying PDF bytes. So this is the first hard problem, and we solve this with our preprocessor. And the preprocessor basically takes a PDF document and does what's called document layout analysis. So document layout analysis is a field of computer vision / natural language processing that is basically taking a old-fashioned document and turning it into a rich data document. So that's part one. And then part two is taking that data document and actually doing some processing to get even more data out of it. So this, if I basically here, I'll scroll down a little bit. If I turn off our live linking, you'll see what this document looks like under the hood. It's a plain black and white document, and it contains no metadata, no rich data, just a PDF. What our live linking is doing is basically taking the document and making it clickable and interactive. And what it's doing is it's going through, for example, any defined term, and it's parsing out the actual defined term text. So instead of scrolling 200 pages, right? Like if I'm reading this section and I need to understand what they're talking about when they say to finance the payment of the budget development costs set out in the initial development budget agreed pursuant to the craft development contract, that's completely unintelligible unless I know what these dependent terms mean, right? And to do that, in macro, instead of scrolling and searching through hundreds of pages and having multiple tabs open, we allow the user to see that like this. The user can now see that initial development budget means the development budget. The development budget is referring to the development costs and the contingency amounts, and so forth. So macro makes everything clickable and interactive. You can see it also does that with sections. So it's understanding the document, it's understanding the sections, it's understanding the defined terms, and it's also understanding the uses of these things. So if you look at the AI generated bookmarks, when I hit generate table of contents, we basically have our AI running over the document and pulling out all of these key entities. Entities being an NLP term for like names, parties, terms, things like that. And you can see now it's in this clickable and interactive form. So when I click on any defined term, for example, like Canadian dollars, you can see the location of all of the uses, right? So I can see that this term is used within this section. So this is what legal documents really look like under the hood, whether it's a deposition transcript, whether it's a brief, whether it's a 10K or a court filing or a credit agreement, merger agreement, vendor agreement, SPA, LPA, PPM, whatever it may be. It's highly modular and cross-referential, just like computer code. So that's macro. And going into sort of a little bit more of an anatomy, and then I'll get to sort of the GPT-4 integration here. The anatomy of documents, this is from my master's thesis on which the sort of the company is based, is that these documents basically look like this under the hood, right? So you have these sections and terms, and these are the bubbles. And the size of the bubble represents the number of cross references that that term has within the document. And what I showed in my master's degree in 2020 is basically without any semantic information about the document. So even without all of the nice, like distributed like vector space that we have in language models, without understanding any of that, you can get useful information out of the document just by looking at the cross-reference structure of the document. So we can do this with different types of documents, and what we'll find is that we can generally find pretty key terms by looking at the size of the bubbles. So how does that relate to GPT-4? Well, basically the core problem when it comes to large language models is the context window. It's like talking to a human who constantly forgets what you said 5 minutes ago, which I'm sometimes guilty of. So it will, it remembers the last 8,000 tokens, but as you're chatting with it, it's constantly forgetting what happened before it. And even worse, when you get into a complex legal document, this document has more than 8,000 tokens, right? So as you're going through the document, it actually can't fit the whole document into memory. Even if you're using the new 32K GPT-4, it can't fit the whole document into memory. And so how useful is it then when you go to ask certain questions if it only contains half of the document, right? So how do we get around this? Well, we need different ways of doing retrieval, right? So we need different ways of going into the document and finding the relevant sections and terms. If I asked our lawyers, our awesome, fantastic lawyers at Cooley who also use the product, or if I asked, let's just say I asked them about a long document to ask, how does this work with like the governing law provisions? And I gave them only one chance to read through the document. It was a document that they hadn't seen before. And they weren't allowed to refer back to the document as they were giving me their answer. They had to pull the answer right from memory. And by the way, they're not even allowed to take a breath. They just have to keep talking, outputting 1 word per second as they speak. This is a hard task. Humans don't operate this way, right? So it's a little bit of too high of an expectation to expect language models to work this way. So what we do in our essentially parsing system and in our GPT-4 integration is chunking down the document into its constituent defined terms and sections so that we more easily know where to focus the actual GPT-4, the GPT-4 query, and it can do so on a smaller amount of prompt input text. So that's the relation to sort of the chunking and how we've been able to make this work. There are other approaches here, document vectors, for example, where you basically create vectors and then do like a retrieval algorithm. So you can do this in a sort of soft distributed way, or you can do it in a graphical way, like we're doing it here with Macro. So this is getting to Thor's point about Microsoft versus other types of integrations and other vendors. I think this is one thing where purpose-built solutions can actually excel over more general solutions. And that historically has been true. It seems like it may be less true in the future because part of the nice thing about these general generative models is they're super general, right? They're trained over all web text. But even in the manner that we like deploy them and that we sample from them and that we constrain them, there's like domain-specific advantages. Okay, so let's take a look. We're still, let me just say, in the early stages of developing this, but first I'm going to show a video and then I'll show the live demos because it takes a little while to generate since we're on the public GPT-4 instance. Okay, so let's just say that I bring in a document here from like a standard YC safe. So you'll see me click in here. I'll bring in a Word document as a standard YC safe. And then I will close the window here, and now I can just generally ask questions of it. So if I go into search, we're still debating where to put this. Right now, we have it under search. And I'm asking, what happens if company goes bankruptcy? Okay, it doesn't even make any sense, right? But because it has a very good understanding of the English language, it's able to answer. And this is why I'm doing a video, so I can skip ahead. I'll show you how long it actually takes afterwards. But we get a pretty coherent answer out of this. So if the company goes bankrupt, this may lead to a dissolution event. In a dissolution event, the investor will be automatically entitled, subject to the liquidation priority, and this is the correct section, to receive a proceeds of distribution equal to the cash out amount. This is the actual defined term in the document, and the purchase amount, right? So these defined terms are actually used in the document. And as we go through, what happens if they do another round at a lower valuation cap? If the company issues another safe with a lower valuation cap, it's not directly affected by the terms of the safe. That makes sense in the context of this safe. To be honest, we've tried some more complex questions. This is a post-money safe, and we've asked questions around the operation of a post-money safe, and we find it's actually like pretty bad about complex multi-part questions. So when it comes to questions that require accessing and retrieving across different provisions in a document, it does hallucinate, and this is something that we're still working on. Another challenge is sort of grounding it on the document that we're looking at and getting it not to basically go haywire and use knowledge from its like internet training, but rather using only the knowledge in the document. So these are persistent challenges when applying GPT-4 here. So that's basically the side panel that we've started with. And essentially our next steps here basically our next steps are to, as I'll show basically in this video, we are making it so that you can click on defined terms and sections just as you can in macro in like the body of the document. So this is basically our next step here, is making all of that work well. And then let me do a little bit of a live demo just to show it working in practice. So macro AI, we'll ask it, let's do something I haven't done before. What will trigger, no, I'll say, what sections of the US code are implicated here? Just the section numbers, please, so that it gives me a short answer. And this is where we sort of get into, oh, and by the way, this is pretty cool, right? So all of the defined terms and sections that are used in this document are nicely parsed out. And it'll tell me, okay, sections 304, 305, 306 of the IRC are implicated in this document. So that is pretty cool. And then let's ask it, what happens if the company dissolves before the safe converts? So we can ask it questions like this. We're on the public instance of GPT-4 for this demonstration, so it's a little bit slow. If you're running like a private instance on Azure, it is faster to generate, and it's also proportional in length. So if the company dissolves before the safe converts, the investor will automatically be entitled, section 1.4D, the ability to cash out amount. So let's go in and see what this means. So is that true? The investor is entitled to receive its right to receive its cash out amount. The cash out amount in the event of a dissolution event, they're entitled to receive. I've read this document about 50 times and I still can't understand it, to be honest. We use this agreement to finance us. It's so confusing. There's like a colloquial understanding of how safes ought to work, but trying to read this document is very confusing. So GPT-4 can help with a document like this. So lots of cross-linking terms. This is where it honestly struggles a little bit still, is the multi-part reasoning across different terms and clauses. But yeah, so that is our integration to start. And then where are we going here? So for next steps, we have chat, which is grounded on the document. Where are we going next? Next, we're going towards editing. So the ability to say, hey, grade my essay like a 10th grade teacher, we're pretty excited about. I wrote a lot of French essays, and well, I wrote a few that were, in my time, I wrote a few that weren't Google translated, and would have been helpful, to have like that sort of real-time feedback, inserting track changes and comments, which will be the exact same system for our legal users who are able to say, negotiate this document according to my playbook, or push back on certain provisions, and having it insert track changes. This is the power of, to Thor, what Thor said about having vendors build specific things is, yes, of course, anyone can use the GPT-4 API, but actually building this into a production PDF and word processing system is like a lot of work, lots of stuff here for us to do. And then the other thing is within our comparison tool. So our comparison tool, which we built with Christy and Kay at Simpson Thacher, basically helps you compare and understand what's happening between files. I won't show the whole demo here, but one thing that traditional tools don't have is the ability to essentially summarize changes. So what we're pretty excited about is not like basically a change report that not only gives you like, oh, here's how many insertions, here's how many deletions, here's how many moves, but extending our compare tool to allow you to actually understand like the downstream implications of different changes in the document. By downstream, I mean downstream in the sense of which terms and sections are affected by certain things in the document. So that's what we're focused on our end for sort of the use of GPT-4 across financial and legal documents and how it relates to sort of the master's thesis that I wrote on complex legal docs. So thanks to Gab for setting up this initial GPT-4 integration for us. There's a lot of work under the hood that you wouldn't think about to make this secure, like CloudFront hiding the private key, making it accessible. Thanks for setting this up in a way that not only is great to demo with, but is scaling to our production customers over the next couple of weeks. And if anyone wants to play around with that, we will be sending out probably a survey on this event page afterwards. We're looking for beta testers for this. It is, it's the kind of thing where we need to control expectations around what it can and can't do. So we'd love to get some sophisticated users hands-on with it and playing with it. Okay. So next steps for macro, compare summaries. Oh, extracting structured data from PDFs we're excited about. So this is one of the main things that our users have been asking us for is pulling out tables and pulling out party names and things like this within the PDF, as well as the ability to do track changes and comments. All right, before we get to question and answers, let me say that I think that all of this is probably a stopgap on the way to where we're really going. A lot of these methods are taking advantage of the fact that GPT-4 only has like an 8K context window, or putting a Band-Aid over that fact. I would presume that over time, these things are going to get better at longer context windows. Maybe they'll learn to use graphical user interfaces, right? When they learn to use GUIs and can operate a keyboard and mouse, I think that kind of changes the game. So I think this is like a really great way, though, to allow us to use these models on complex documents in the short term, meaning like 6 months to 2 or 3 years, when we still have these context window and hallucination problems. Okay, discussion. So we had a few questions here that we wanted to talk about with users. I wanted to ask Thor one thing, and then we'll open it up. So Thor, we were discussing pricing. This is a really interesting topic because like, do we equate the solution to the value provided like before in a pre-GPT world? Do we think about it in terms of all the costs are going to be reduced? Do we think about it in a cost plus model in terms of the amount of energy and maintenance required to operate the servers? Do we think about this in terms of a per use model or a flat model? Thor, what have you been seeing in the market, and what do you think that buyers are going to look for in terms of purchasing solutions here?
I mean, I've seen a lot of overpriced solutions. So in other words, they build a GPT solution and they say, a year ago without GPT, the value of that would have been this. So we're going to have a price that corresponds to that value. And I mean, quite frankly, that's just not accurate anymore. I think for a lot of these GPT solutions, we're going to see the pricing coming down. I think it gets really tricky, though, because, you mentioned this earlier, the compute costs can be a relevant factor, which they have not been in the past. And you could argue you're going to get better results if you plug through all 10,000 agreements on your system versus just 10. But the question is that going to bring accuracy from 99.9 to 99.91? And I think that's where it gets really tough. And so you're going to have to make judgment calls on, how you price these things, because you also don't want to, if you do it on a user basis and that one user chugs through thousands of documents, all of a sudden you're eating the cost on that on your end. So, you have to be attuned to that. And it's not going to be easy, especially because you're providing a lot of value, but others can provide that too. Compute costs are there. Things are changing so quickly. And then most importantly, no one really knows the value you provide until you have it. I mean, if you went head to head with Microsoft product, it's not going to be easy to determine who has the better tool. You have to try it on dozens of documents. You have to explore it, and that fine-grained expertise is really going to be tough to have. So all in all, it's not easy. I encourage people to start low because it's about getting people to understand it, and once they stick, I mean, that's probably where you want to be.
Well, in the chat, Al Hounsel is asking about any law firms on here using Llama Index for chunking and retrieval in our apps. If anyone wants to join and turn on their camera, feel free to jump into the conversation. Al, I haven't seen this. We've been talking to, obviously, I don't know, most of the market, a lot of the market. Thor, have you or Casey seen anyone rolling their own using Llama Index or similar?
No, not actual. I've not seen law firms doing it. I know there are tinkerers who kind of outside of work are playing with lots of things on various fronts, but I'm not aware of any officially sanctioned law firm project. Thor?
We're tinkering with a lot of things. This may or may not have crossed our desk. I think chunking is something we are looking into for obvious reasons because of the benefits.
And then on prompts, so Thor, you highlighted how law firms are going to be providing their prompts, and that law firms are probably best positioned to provide prompts as opposed to vendors. From our perspective, in terms of IP ownership, the side panel is like the prompts that you insert into the side panel, as well as any saved prompts, are the property of the user. It's user generated content. And I think that is probably going to be the only sort of acceptable way for vendors to move forward, at least, is that sort of the questions and answers that the users ask the system are an extension of their own expertise, and knowing what questions to ask or what things to suggest for the track changes.
Do you think that's a benefit of Macro, though, that it's a standalone app? I've seen a lot of solutions in the market that attempt to do what you're doing, but they do it as a plugin within Word. Can you talk about sort of the pros and cons of having a standalone app versus a plugin?
Yeah, so the standalone app really allows us to, the rate of change that we can do compared to building a plugin, there's benefits to a plugin, and in the life cycle of the company in the early days, we considered this, but it is a Band-Aid. If you can build a solution, but the problem is once you add enough plugins to Word or Outlook, those applications slow down, especially the Windows versions, in terms of the time to launch. And as well, they're just heavily limiting in terms of what you can do with your plugin. So for many vendors, I would recommend creating a plugin because it is where people live. But for us, we have a really incredible engineering team and really want to push the status quo. So we've basically rebuilt PDF and word processing from the ground up, which allows us to do things like the definition pop-ups and put the chat side panel wherever we want, and essentially not owe any royalties or anything to Microsoft or anybody else. So by controlling the experience, we can create a much better experience overall compared to plugins. The other thing is iPads. So one of our most popular requests are putting this on an iPad, which is something that we're going to be working on. I'd say this mostly comes from finance and law firm partners. And benefits there that we can deploy a standalone app, right? So it can live in the web, it can live on an iPad, it can live on a computer, and we can deploy basically the same code to all of those places. Cool. Awesome. So let's see, we have a few more questions here. Yes, Scott, could be an interesting use case for non-lawyers to parse through legal documents. I agree. We're looking to start with lawyers. I think I've noticed Spellbook doing the same, a few others doing the same. We're also, I would say, starting with sophisticated professionals, where I think that this in sort of the medium and long term goes is definitely helping anybody understand long documents. I think it's a good place to start with folks who can sort of double check the output before going to everybody who is not able to sort of double check the output of these systems. Cool. And then Mike asks, how do you describe the multi-part reasoning problem? Is it limited to tokens, not a database? Looking for a plain English description of why these tools can't seem to process complex rules. I'm not sure if that's true that they can't process complex rules like Boolean logic and so forth. If you like put in Boolean logic or coding problems, or Gab, who is just sitting beside me, asked it to write the Aho-Karasik algorithm for going through text, it is very good at sort of language-based reasoning, language meaning like any sort of token-based reasoning. But when it comes to fact retrieval, it's a highly compressed version of all of world history. And so it's not going to be the best sort of database in terms of retrieval. And of course, there are still places where it can't process complex rules. But if you look at 4, I think it's a little bit, if you've been playing with 3.5, I would definitely recommend playing with 4. It's significantly better when you get into like Boolean logic and things like this.
Jacob, one of the things that's nice about the app is you're able to collect a lot of metadata on where people are using it and for what functions. I think, do you see that driving sort of your future roadmap? I mean, it sounds like the answer is yes. I don't know if you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, this is another nice benefit of having our own sort of bespoke solution, is that we understanding which terms people are using over and over again, which terms, which sections, and some of this is on the margins possible without GPT, but really is helpful when it comes to reusing knowledge, is knowing which things users are using, as well as, we don't do anything with this yet, but understanding how much time users spend actually like editing certain sections, right? Like if you make a bunch of track changes, if you spend a lot of time editing a certain provision, that could potentially be useful to downstream fine tuning of the model. So all these things could be useful. There's limited ways in which we're using them now, just because the ability to fine tune the models is still sort of nascent, but all these things could be useful once, getting that data obviously in a secure way from our clients. Cool. Yeah, so lastly, I see we're just about out of time. We have a lot more questions here, but really excited. Thanks everyone for joining, and would love to share more about Macro. I'm Jacob at macro.com. If anyone has any follow-up questions from the demo, wants to discuss further. Thanks, Thor. Thanks, Casey, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.